Hey there, and welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Levitation Jumping Method Section 2. This is going to be a great section because we're editing an image from start to finish. There's no cutting it up. We're basically from opening all the way to the end. We're going to be showing you guys how to composite two different photos together, one of which was taken with our subject jumping on a dresser, the other of which has a completely clean background. We're going to show you how to remove the dresser from the image very easily. It's going to be some quick layer masking and some adjustment layers, and everything is going to blend together seamlessly. In this section, you're going to learn how to composite, how to dodge and burn, color correct, and even advanced masking. Let's get into it. We got a lot to do. Hey there, and welcome back to this tutorial. This is section 2, and we're going to be completing from start to finish this image here on our left. And I'm really excited about this for a couple of reasons. First, because it's a really cool image, but also because it's going to show you guys really how simple levitation photography can be if you take all the necessary steps and make sure you take all the photos that you need to take. So if you haven't watched the photography section of this pro tutorial, I would highly recommend doing it because it's very informative. It'll give you a really good idea of everything you need to do on the photography side of things. So the basic idea when you're going to be doing this type of levitation photo is to capture a couple different photos. Basically, you want a photo of your background without anything in it, and then you want a photo of your subject, preferably in the exact same place, and again, preferably with the exact same lighting as well. Now in this case, the lighting does change a little bit, but we can take care of that using we'll use a curves adjustment layer to wind up changing that. So we're going to be removing a couple objects here and taking out this piece of furniture. So let's go ahead and get into it. It's going to be relatively straightforward, which is it's always nice. Okay, now just to be able to see what I'm doing, I'm going to grab an adjustment layer and we're going to go to curves. We're going to just click right here in the middle and grab this and bring it up a little bit. Now this isn't going to wind up being visible in the final image. It's not going to be this light. However, this is going to really help me see what I'm actually doing because it is a pretty dark image. Okay, so our first step here, we need to just figure out, here's our layer with our subject on it. We're going to just put a layer mask right here on this layer. And in this case, because our subject isn't touching the piece of furniture, she's not, actually touching the table, there's no shadow interaction or anything like that, it's going to be a very easy job to mask this out. So what we're going to do is click on our layer mask and just paint black with our regular paintbrush, and I'm just going to paint right over here where our table is. And you can see it lines up very nicely. The exposure is slightly different, which is that happens sometimes, but that's not a huge deal. Let's go ahead and zoom out here a little bit. The exposure is different, so what we're going to wind up doing is blending these together with like a curves adjustment layer. There we go, and you can see I'm using a very large soft edge brush here to kind of help those blend together just a little bit better. I painted away her shadow a little bit, so I'll just paint that back. There we go. Let's paint this away too. Paint back some information up there, and all this is just with the layer mask, going very simply here. Okay, let's just turn this off and on. Okay, so any other areas, like if I want some of the reflection there from the wall to be visible, we can do that. All right, whoops, made them both invisible. Just want to make sure that all the areas are covered. Now, if you're curious on if you missed any areas, you can hold down Alt or Option and click on your layer mask, and then you can see, any areas where you might have missed, like up here, and looks like down here we missed some areas down there as well. These areas I'm okay with this photo actually showing through because I liked it was a little bit darker. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's hold Alt or Option and click on the layer mask again. Okay, now we can see that our exposures are just a little bit different. So what we're going to be doing, we have our curves adjustment layer. I'm going to keep this visible because I want to be able to actually see what I'm doing. We're going to grab our background layer, which is right here, and it needs to be a little bit darker to match. You can see it's dark and then it goes to light, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we're going to do is I'm going to grab an adjustment layer. We're going to go down to curves, okay, and then I'm going to clip this adjustment layer to this background layer. and it's going to make sure that this adjustment layer only affects the background. So let's right click here, and I'm going to go to create clipping mask. Okay, now that it's a clipping mask, I can do whatever I want to this curves adjustment layer, and it's only going to affect the background image. So let's just click and drag this down just a little bit. There we go, until we can see. Let's just zoom in so you can really get a good sense of what that actually does here. It's just darkening that image down a little bit, which really helps it to blend in. And the great way about this technique is it's very easy to see, right? You can see exactly how far it needs to go. So there we go. That looks pretty good. And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but you want to get it pretty good there. Okay, next thing we're going to do, let's go ahead and crop this a little bit in as well. You can see we've got a little bit of a border around here, and that forms whenever you do, when you align a couple of different images, it just shifts them slightly. So we're going to hit C for the crop tool, and we're going to crop this in just a little bit, take some information from the top, and the right, and the left, and the bottom as well. There we go, and let's hit that check button. The only thing I would recommend making sure whenever you're using the crop tool is to keep this delete crop pixels, keep that unchecked. It's going to make sure that if you need that information back, you can get it back. If it's checked, it's gone for good. No luck. All right, let's go ahead and hit that checkbox, and we're looking great. So as far as levitation goes, this is most of our effect already. She's far up in the air, and things are looking really good. So we're going to continue working on the image, but you can see how simple it really is, especially if you take the photos in the right way. Basically, having the subject as little interaction with the background as possible. It can be very, very easy to do this. Okay, now I do want to go ahead and create a little bit more of a shadow, because we had to get rid of some of the shadow while we were editing. So what we're going to do is here above our subject, we're going to go ahead and create an adjustment layer, and we're going to go to curves again. Okay, and then we're just going to simply click right here in the middle and drag that down a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good for the shadow. Now we're going to invert this layer mask, so I'm going to hit Control Command I on the layer mask, and then we're going to include this brush that it's called Best Brush. I use it very frequently. It's included in the tutorial as well, and we're just going to use that to paint some of the shadow back here. So I'm now painting white on my layer mask. There we go. Down here in this area. All right. It's going to add to the shadow, and it's going to help sell the effect a little bit more. All right. This looks great already. Now, keep in mind this layer we had on there earlier because it just helped us to actually see what we're doing. And this is a really great way to edit whenever you're working with a dark image. Okay, so now that our effect is pretty much taken care of, there are a few more things that I want to do with this image, just to kind of clean things up a little bit and bring it to a point where I feel like it's a complete image. So first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take care of a few things that I find a little bit distracting. This guy right here, that's just a little bit distracting. That down there is a little bit distracting. Those are really the big things that pull my eye in. This is right near her foot, it's a little bit distracting as well. All right, we're going to do some dodging and burning on our subject as a whole, and then we're going to do some color and light to the image as a whole too. Okay, and I tend to circle things in red just so I have a general plan of what I'm doing, but don't feel like you have to do that. Okay, looks great. Let's go ahead and group everything together because we can see we're getting a little bit cluttered here, and I like to stay really well grouped so I have no questions about where everything is. So starting from the background, here's our background, and then the layer darkening it down. So let's shift click the two of those and hit Control Command G. It's in group. Double click there, call that background. Okay, this is our subject, right? And then this is a shadow, so that's going to get grouped with the subject. So let's shift click the two of those, Command G, double click there. All right, and then this is our plan, and then this is just lightening things up. So those two can be grouped together, and I usually call this something like extra because it's not a part of the image, but it's good to have. Okay, Now let's go ahead and create a new layer, group this with itself, and we'll just call this retouch. Alright, we're not necessarily retouching her so much as the background. Okay, and now we're ready to get rid of some of these things that are a little bit, that kind of pull attention away from our subject here. Now, the one cool thing you can do is, I'm going to turn this curves adjustment layer back on, which brightens things up here, and I can actually use the clone stamp tool on a layer underneath that and keep this layer on to help me see what I'm actually doing. The key here is you want to click on your clone stamp tool, and here on my sample I want to sample current and below, and what it's going to do is it's going to sample this layer and everything below it. But because my curves adjustment layer, the thing that's making it brighter, is above everything, it's still going to work out pretty well. I'll just show you a quick example, then we'll get into it. Okay, so we're going to sample this point here. Alright, let's sample there, and then we're going to start painting in. There we are. Very nice, and you can see that looks good, and then I'll turn this layer off, and it still looks appropriate, right? Now, let's pretend that I didn't do that. Let's have this sample as all layers, which is going to include this curves adjustment layer, and let's try sampling right over here. So I'll sample there, and then paint there. You can see already immediately it's not looking right, and if I turn that layer off, it wouldn't look right there as well. Or if I had this layer visible and I had a layer above it and I did current and below, it would look right while I'm clone stamping. You can see that it looks pretty normal, looks pretty good, but as soon as I turn this curves adjustment layer off, you can see that in fact this is too light. So anyway, just a quick little lesson on clone stamping. Just make sure you're doing it beneath any layers that you add to brighten things up. Okay, there we are. Let's hit S for the clone stamp. Again, current and below is what we want here. And we're just going to clone stamp that area out. That looks good. Alright, let's navigate to our little strap here. We're going to sample a point and then just paint it in. There we go. And it's a pretty dark area with relatively low detail, so it's, you don't have to be 100%, you can be a little off here, and honestly, I can't even tell. But areas that, on someone's face, you want to spend a lot of time and make sure your clone stamping is perfect. In a dark little corner like that, it's usually not as big of a deal. Okay. Now, here's one last tip for using the clone stamp tool. If you'd like to see a little preview, let me sample this dress here so you can get a good idea of what this looks like. If I sample this dress and start painting over here, you can see I've got a little preview of what I'm about to clone stamp, so I can figure out exactly where it's going to look good, right? Well, you want to make sure that if you want to see that preview, go to Window, and then down here to Clone Source. And if you have this show overlay checked, it's going to show you a little sample of what you're going to actually paint. As long as it's unchecked, you won't see that. So show overlay, it's going to give you a little sample. There we go, and you can see where it is. Let's close that out. That really helps when you're trying to align something like this area. Like I want to get rid of this thing, remember, because it's one of the things I circled. But it's I need to make sure this line continues. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option, sample this point, go right up there, and then we're going to start painting right up there. Alright, and so you can see how easy that was for me to make sure that line continued on. It's super simple. Alright, there we go. So you can see little clone stamping. You know what? Let's take care of this area here on the floor as well. It looks like someone had a little spill. Alright. There we go. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And you can get really nitpicky and, spend all day playing around the clone stamp tool. But you probably have better things to do. Okay. That's looking really good. So let's go ahead and we're going to turn this extras group off. Now we've got a retouch. Just got rid of a couple things. in this same retouch group, we're going to go ahead and do some dodging and burning. And I am going to be dodging and burning with a soft light layer. So we've got a new layer. I'm going to change it from normal down here to soft light. Now, there are a lot of ways to dodge and burn. If you'd like to learn more ways, just go to phlearn.com. In the search bar, type in dodge and burn. There are a lot of ways to do it, and we've taught just about all of them. This is the most simple method, and I think it's one of my favorites. So, soft light layer, we're going to use our brush tool. Okay, we're going to hit D for the default colors, which are going to be black and white. Now you can hit X to switch back and forth. So D for default, X to switch back and forth. And basically what I want to do is I want to choose my opacity at 100%, and I want my flow to be really low, something like 10. So I'm going to hit Shift 1, and my flow is going to be to go down to 10%. So now, whenever I paint with a nice soft edge brush, we're going to paint on the fabric. I'm going to paint white right here on this fabric, and it's going to just lighten up wherever I paint. There we go. The key here is also to try to keep your brush size about the size of the wrinkle or fabric or other area that you'd like to dodge or burn. Alright, and I find that fabric like this, like the dress, really does a good job with dodging and burning. Dodging and burning tends to look really nice on this sort of thing. So right now all I'm doing is painting white. You can see there it is. And I'm focusing on the lighter areas, which is just lightening them up a little bit. If you paint too far, or you get an area that you didn't mean to paint, just hit E for the eraser tool and just erase it right away. Very simple. But this is just going to do a really great job at adding a little bit more detail and giving the viewer's eye a little bit something more interesting to look at here. So right now we're painting with white over the highlights, and in just a minute I'm going to paint with black over the shadows. Alright, and again, you want to keep your brush size about the same size as the area you're painting. So I'm going to paint this here now. Okay, so let's make our brush nice and small. There we go. Alright, let's look at that before and the after. You can see how that just like, it brings the fabric to life a little bit more, huh? Alright, now we're going to paint with black, so same layer. B for the brush tool, and then I'm going to hit X. Okay, and that's going to switch between my foreground and background color. And now I'm going to paint in some of the darker areas. So what dodging and burning essentially does is it increases the contrast between light and dark areas. And when you do that, it really helps to define shape. Not always super important, but when you have something like this, like look at that dress. Really nice. When you have an area like that with so much nice shape, it's nice to change that. Alright, now we're going to get rid of, we used these little pasties to cover up our subject's nipples, so we're just going to get rid of the little outline right there. I'm going to hit J for our healing brush tool. I'm going to sample this area. We're just going to paint right over top of those. Just that little outline there. Alright, just so we don't need to see any detail there. Great. Let's click this layer back visible again, and now we'll continue to dodge and burn. So it's a really great tool whenever you need to define any shapes. Alright, we'll paint some black on there. Give her a little bit of ab definition. No one minds a little bit of ab definition. If someone was retouching me, I'd be like, Pour it on. Let's do it. Put that on my hot singles under 40 dating website. Photoshop professional under 40. No, I'm not in the market. But if I was, boy, would I Photoshop some abs on myself. Leading to bitter disappointment. Whomever fell for my Photoshop tricks and actually decided to go on a date with me. Ha 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 ha. Lucky for me, I have a very loving girlfriend, and she doesn't need fake abs to think I'm amazing. All right. I'd say that. She watches this, she'd be like, yeah, that'd be nice. Let's get that in real life. All right. I love making fun of myself for your enjoyment. All right. This looks really good. This looks really good. So we can see how I tend to do this with any image that we really want to help define shapes a little bit better. So dresses and clothing, you can see I did it lightly on her face, but mostly sticking to like this area. Because when you dodge and burn, let's just show you a quick example. Sometimes when you dodge and burn, you can actually make things worse. Like if I were to paint this dark here and light there, for instance, you can see how that actually gave a lot less definition there. So you want to make sure you actually paint dark where the dark areas are and light where the light areas are. And that's going to make sure to enhance shape rather than take away from shape. All right, there we are. Let's look at that before and the after. That's really nice. Okay, cool. Next thing we're going to do, let's create a new layer. We're going to go ahead and hit Command G to group it with itself. We're going to double click, and I'm going to call this color. So we're going to color this image a little bit, and then we're going to be done. We're going to be moving on to the next one. All right, in here, I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer. Our curves adjustment layer, we're going to go to RGB, which is red, green, and blue. Affects light and dark. We're going to bring this up just a bit. There we go. Now we're going to go to our red channel. I'm going to bring that up. Adds a little bit more red. The green channel, which adds a little bit more green. Okay, and then the blue channel, which takes away a little bit of the blue. All right, so the opposite of blue is yellow, by the way. So that's just adds a little bit of yellow. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm warming the image up quite a bit. All right, now I'm going to hit Controller Command I on that layer mask. Then I'm going to choose a very large soft edge brush and just kind of paint this in right here into the center of our image. All right, that looks good. So this is pretty appropriate for the background, making the background a little bit lighter, but you can see on our subject it's actually made her a little bit too light in some areas, especially around her shirt and her face. It's almost like it's blown out, right? So what we want to make sure we do is here on my layer mask, we can either choose to lower the opacity of that, or we can just click on the layer mask. I can use my brush tool and I can paint black. But this time I'm going to paint black. I'm going to bring my opacity down. So if I bring my opacity down to 50% by hitting 5, it's only going to allow me to paint away half of my effect. I'd have to lift my brush off and paint it away. You know what? I'm going to just give you this example because this is a pretty important concept, learning how opacity and flow work. So I just want to make sure that everyone's on board here. Okay, so if I have a layer mask on this red layer and I have an opacity and a flow of 100%, right? I paint black, it just goes away. Okay? Now, if I bring my flow down to like 20%, shift 2, if I paint over it, it takes away some of it. You can see, just like that. And if I continue going over it and over it and over it, it's going to keep on taking it away. It's like, you know, it's like building up. Okay? And I haven't lifted the pen off of the tablet just yet, or the mouse off mouse pad, whatever it is. Okay, so that's how flow works. Let's bring our flow back up to 100. Let's bring our opacity down. Now opacity works like this. I'm going to paint here, and it's going to take away 50% of my visibility. But even if I go over it over and over again, you can see it's not going to go anymore. I have to lift the cursor off and then paint again, and then wherever they overlap, it'll take away another 50%. Okay? So most of the time you actually want to use flow instead of opacity, because flow gives you a much more natural effect. You can see this doesn't really look that natural, right? You can see hard lines wherever I didn't repeat. So most of the time you want to use flow, but if you only want to take away just a little bit of an area, as is the case with the color on her face, then in that case I'm going to use opacity. Other than that, I use flow. Hope that helped out, because it's really good to know. Alright, so we're going to use an opacity of 50%. I'm going to paint this black on our subject. And I'm not lifting my paintbrush. And it's making sure that, there we go. Alright. There we go. Let's paint a little bit back here, right on her dress. But I think that worked nicely on her face and her top, because they were a little bit too colored, I thought. All right, there we go. That looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Let's see if we want to do any more lightness on this. Just bring my curves up just a little bit. We're gonna hit Command or Control I on this, and then paint white on here just to lighten up these walls a little bit, because they were getting a little bit too dark. All right, there we go. Okay, and then at the very end, I'm going to throw on a color balance adjustment layer. Let's go down here to color balance. This one we're not toning so much. The second image in section 3, we're going to be toning quite a bit more. But this one we're gonna leave it pretty neutral. I'm just going to add like a little bit of red, and there we go. Because it was nice, but it was like a little bit green. Can you see the before? It's like a little bit green. So zoom out here. Oh, it's a little bit too much yellow. All right, because I do want it to be warm, but it was like green and warm. I want it to be more like a reddish orange warm, which is a lot more of a natural color. Green is not so natural looking. All right, so there's the before and the after with the coloring there. All right, that's beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and take a look at the breakdown. Let's make sure, by the way, that we did everything we outlined in the beginning. So we did our color and our light, took care of these areas, we took care of the table, and we did dodging burning. Perfect. All right, so extras can be invisible as well. So we've got our background. We put our subject here in place. Made it so much easier because we didn't really have to cut her out from the background. We were allowed to use a very loose layer mask, and that makes the job way easier. We had some retouching as well as some dodging and burning, which added some really nice enhancements on her dress. We're going to turn our color on, and that looks great. You know what? We're going to turn this curves adjustment down just a little bit. Okay, there we go. I like to do this when I'm finishing up my edits, by the way, turning things off and on, and you can kind of see, it'll give you a really good idea of if you did something to a greater degree than you'd like. Like sometimes you'll overdo something and it'll look totally normal because you've been staring at an image for the last 10 minutes, and then you'll like go get a coffee and come back and you're like, oh my god, it's too much. So I like to turn things off and on again, just like this. Gives me a really good idea of what we've actually done. So let's go ahead and save that. Command S to save, and we are good to go. All right, that's the end of this image, section 2. We will see you in section 3.